So next up, we have last speaker, but certainly not least. Our final speaker before the panel session is Dr. Lorenzo Norris. Since arriving at GW in 2006, Dr. Norris has held a variety of leadership positions throughout the GW medical enterprise. Currently, he serves as Chief Wellness Officer, Medical Director for the GW Resiliency and Well-being Center, and Associate Dean of Student Affairs and Administration for the GW School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Dr. Norris is also an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. Dr. Norris regularly publishes papers in academic journals and has presented at numerous academic symposiums and national meetings. He has guest edited 4 issues of Psychiatric Annals with themes ranging from cancer and depression to hope in cancer survivorship. Currently, he serves as the editor-in-chief for MD Edge Psychiatry. Recently, he completed a 2-year term as DC chapter president of the Washington Psychiatric Society. Dr. Norris has served as a member of the American Psychiatric Association Council on Psychosomatic Medicine, the Katzen Cancer Research Center for Board of Directors, the Katzen Cancer Research Center Board of Directors, and he was the recipient of the Leonard Tao 2011 Humanism in Medicine Award. He's also been recognized as Washington's top doctor for multiple years. Dr. Norris has been elected to membership in the American College of Psychiatry and to the Group for the Advancement for Psychiatry. Personally, I have really enjoyed the opportunity to work closely with him in founding the GW Resiliency and Wellbeing Center. In fact, I think we are the perfect partner to do this, and it's been a real pleasure. But as you will see, he is extremely knowledgeable and charismatic. So get ready for an engaging talk. Over to you, Lorenzo.
All right. Hey, Lee, thank you so very much for that kind introduction. I wish I would have, honestly, the speakers ahead of us were they're just great. I mean, I feel so like, just good, just really good right now. I mean, we could have just said like, Lorenzo's here to talk. So, but with that being said, let's, and I echo just in terms of with Lee, Dr. Frame being with the Resiliency and Wellbeing Center. And it wasn't the Resiliency and Wellbeing Center until she came. So that pretty much says it. So, and hopefully what I'm going to share with you today is just a little bit of the journey in regards to the center, how it's evolved, and kind of maybe share with you a little bit of Lee and I's approach, what we've learned and what we still need to learn. But maybe it will hopefully also build on some of what our already excellent speakers have already talked about in terms of resilience, what that means, growth, acceptance, spirit, and being optimistic and looking forward. And let me just go ahead and get started. All right, so we can make room for this excellent panel discussion. I personally got a lot of questions from the mind-body medicine folks, but I got to let other people talk. So let's see here. Let me share my screen. Okay, let's see here. Start slideshow. Okay, thumbs up. Everyone can see my slides. Okay, all right, very good. Test, great. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about cultivating realistic optimism across a health enterprise. I'd say this with a sense of certainly humility with everything that we've been through collectively as a population. It's just shared humanity over the past 2 years. So these are lessons that are learned. And I tell folks this all the time. If I say something that makes a little bit of sense, that's either because I learned it from one of probably 3 places, either my colleagues, my patients, or just the universe in general. If I say something and you're kind of like, where's he going with it? That's me trying to be academic and cute. So I ask for your forgiveness in regards to that. So let's, with no further ado, let's kind of get right into this, okay? Now, start out with a little something. I was talking to my daughter this week, actually, before she was going to school, and she was like, "Dad," I'm like, "Yeah, Taylor, what's up?" She's like, "Dad, Mondays just suck. They're kind of tough. I'm like, yeah, it kind of is. It's NBA playoffs. I mean, we wanted to see things, even though the Cavs got knocked out. I'm originally from Northeast Ohio. And she's like, shouldn't Mondays be optional? I'm like, oh, well, I see your point. I see your point. We certainly can maybe we can start to think about it. And she's like, nah, they should be optional. I mean, so forget trying to win an argument with like a 15-year-old getting ready to turn 16. So I was just like, all right, let me back off. Let me let you come to this on your own. And I started to talk about, well, what is it that you want to do in your life? What is it that we've been talking about? And then she started to talk. And then, you know, by the time we hit the cheese eggs in the morning, she's like, you know something? Dad, I think I know why Mondays aren't optional. Why? Because easy is not an option. I was like, oh, okay. All right, from the seeds of youth, because I didn't tell her that. But the idea is that anything worth doing, anything where we have to do something, it's not initially easy. We have to put in an investment. We have to put in some time. We have to put in some effort to it. So as we go through this talk, and it's just starting to think about maybe your own, if you will, clinic, unit, department, family, community, and how you cultivate things or how you continue to grow in your own unique way, just know that easy it's not an option, but that's okay, because that's, in my opinion, that's a very useful thing. All right, a very useful thing. So at the start of the pandemic, I still remember Teambased. We were in some meeting, and she had just come on board, didn't know she was going to be dean in the midst of a pandemic. And it probably was like February or March or something of that nature. She said, well, you know, I'll see you guys in a couple of months. And at first I was like, what do you mean she's going to see us in a couple of months? That seems a little bit like pessimistic. I mean, what about a couple of weeks? I mean, we're going to figure this whole thing out, right? Wrong. All right. Later on, probably 2 or 3 months in, I was asked by Dr. Bruno Petino, GW, medical director of GW Hospital, to talk about the emotional phases of a disaster response at that point in time. And ever since that, I have been utilizing this slide to kind of describe exactly how I think about the pandemic, how I think about, if you will, our emotional responses to it. And then also it's going to give you an idea of how the GW Resiliency and Well-being Center came about. So again, this is evidence-based, and I have the if you will, where it came from. But to me, this is important, you know, in terms of thinking about our emotional responses to a disaster, pre-disaster, impact, heroic, honeymoon, disillusionment, reconstruction. I bring this up because every place that I've given this lecture, or I've shown this to, everyone in their own unique way, in their own unique community, has used this as a way to frame where they are at or what their response patterns could look like. And I find it very useful. I distinctly remember when we entered into the impact, the shock, when we entered in the heroic phase, everyone was sewing masks and doing things of that nature. You saw, I still remember the applause, if you will, for healthcare professionals. And I should hope definitely for all of those that in general, you can do it for healthcare professionals. I applauded my folks at my local grocery store that was working there without shielding and all of these different things. You can applaud a lot of people, but at the same time, I knew that we were just here. And eventually we were gonna go here. So in certain ways, early mid 2019, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. Early mid 2019, if you will, a bit of, if you will, a reliance, or I should say 2020, a bit of an over-reliance on the hero complex, okay? Now, when you look at the symptoms, this is actually taken from the Pulse survey, okay? Because we have to understand that, in my mind, COVID actually doesn't necessarily just strictly cause a lot of issues. It just reveals what was already there or compounds it. So this is a Pulse symptom survey, which I found also very useful. So in 2019, we had, if you will, already very significant levels of anxiety and depression if you just do a pulse check in the population. But in 2020, you could see that those numbers just jumped astronomically. All right, you know, 30%, 24%, 34% for one or both. That is a massive amount. And those of us in health professions, we can tell you that, and certainly in my opinion, I actually thought that might be a bit of an underestimate. If you want my opinion about it, it could have been an underestimate, but we were facing a challenge like no other. Again, this is just another, if you will, report of where people were at in terms of their symptoms of anxiety and depression in the midst of the pandemic. And I think it's important because all of this started to lay the ground in terms of the need for the Resiliency and Well-being Center here at GW Medical Enterprise. Now, in addition to the anxiety, the depression, and everything that people were going through, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the effect of social isolation, which was massive, okay? If you look at the evidence base, when people had to shelter in place, not only were they worried, not only were they stressed, it had up to probably a third or 37% a negative mental health effect, okay? And also certain populations could have been a greater risk of adverse mental health outcomes. This social isolation, I think I'm trying to tie this into some of the challenges that social isolation caused in regards to resilience, all right? Okay, basically many of the measures that we use to prevent COVID-19 prevented our social interaction. What you need to understand, without turning this into a neuroanatomy lesson, is that our brains are literally wired to connect. That's how we as humanity have survived and grown. We are literally wired to connect. And if you understand the social brain, you'll understand the effects of social distancing, all right? Due to the fact that we are wired to connect, I'm sure many people in this audience will realize it. But when you isolate somebody, you actually can activate the same pain receptors that are activated like if you were to get hit on your elbow or something of that nature. I mean, think about that for a moment. The social isolation in and of itself can trigger a pain response. And while to this group that may seem very obvious, to many others that was not. I don't know, I can't see everybody, we can't get a show of hands, but I know, I don't know how many people have to socially isolate. I did once, all right? And I did it in my house, and I have a very comfy house with family. I gotta tell you, it was awful. It was awful. I mean, I still, even though they were there, I still felt disconnected. Just the idea of not being able to reach out or knowing I could interact with folks, even with my training in psychiatry, self-care, all of this, it still was very difficult. So I can only imagine how that was for others. So this social isolation had a massive effect. And I'm gonna, it not only did it take away from our ability to connect, I'm going to say that it really pushed our ability, our frustration tolerance, as well as our resilience to the limit. Okay, now, healthcare professionals, okay? In the midst of COVID, this is just one line of evidence. 20 to 25% of healthcare professionals were experiencing anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? So our healthcare professionals were really being pushed in ways that they had never, for most of them, had never been pushed before. I had the, I was actually, it's interesting, I believe one of the speakers was speaking about 9/11. I actually was in New York during 9/11. Actually, I was an intern at Mount Sinai Hospital in 9/11. And I still remember them speaking about a code I had never heard. And I was asking somebody, I was coming from Cleveland, Ohio, Case Western grad, born and bred. So definitely recognize the University Hospital's symbol from Dr. Adon. But basically when I was at Mount Sinai, I still remembered when that code came, and of course I was an intern, I didn't know anything. So I was just kind of like, what does that mean? And they said, it's a terrorist attack code. I'm like, what? A terrorist who? Who's doing what? That doesn't make any sense. So when I was in New York at that time, I still remember NYU and the lower part of New York getting absolutely, over the next couple of weeks, getting hammered with just the emotional toll, the loss of life, the tragedy, everything they had to deal with. Why am I bringing you this story? From my vantage point, depending on what part of the country you're in and who you talk to, for the first probably 6 months or so of the pandemic, wherever you were at, it was like 9/11 every day. That's what it felt like. That's what our healthcare professionals were going through, okay? This is a slide I put up. I want to thank my good colleague, Dr. Howard Straker, superb physician assistant, as well as just all around good guy at GW. Because when I say health professionals, I mean everybody. I want to be very clear about that. That's something Lee and I always emphasize. When we say health professional, we're talking about everybody in any interaction you have on this medical enterprise. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm talking administrative staff. I'm talking environmental staff. I'm talking all of us, because health is in and of itself a team-based activity. And I will make the argument that part of the secret sauce, or another aspect of resilience that really got chipped into, was the team-based part of it. That's where I kind of already gave you the kind of the take home point a little bit. But yes, resiliency is a skill that we can learn, but that skill can absolutely be modified if we are learning it together as a team with a realistic, optimistic approach. Okay. And the team is everyone. Every single person is, if you're in a community, you're on the team. So again, look, healthcare workers have been pushed to the limit. They're experiencing a number of things: depression, anxiety. And I still remember my colleague, great, Dr. Christina Prather. Dr. Christine Prather. And she said, Lorenzo, you are missing something, because I was focusing on things. And she's like, what am I missing? She looked me down, you're missing trauma. I'm like, you're right. Okay, I'm not giving enough focus on trauma. And she said, no, you're missing it. And then I started to talk to folks, because yes, I did see patients with COVID as a psychiatrist. I was in the hospital, but I was not on the main COVID floors. People told me stories like, when I first started, everyone died. Like, they came to the floor, they died. Many of us had never been through anything like that for that stretch of time. Certainly, we have had very difficult nights on call. We had very difficult, but you never had that much, and that feeling of, if you will, I would also say helplessness, as well as maybe a sense of hopelessness, certainly, as well as fear in terms of what could occur or happen to you in your own personal safety. I firmly believe that as we continue to transition out of the pandemic, in these stories we share, I talk with folks like, yes, I lived in my RV for like 3 months. Never saw my family because I was scared what would happen if I came back. All right. So these type of stories and the trauma that people that went through was very real. And all of this is kind of the, if you will, this is kind of the heat, the environment that the Resiliency and Well-being Center came from. Okay. Now, in the midst of this, take yourself back. This is now late. We're getting into kind of late 2020, rather. We're in the pandemic. We're in late 2020, and our residents are getting really incredibly hammered. And our GME dean, Dean Harold Frazier, said, Lorenzo, we have to do something. We have to start looking at what's going on. So we did a survey of our residents. All right. And I want to thank Dr. Tony Artino for really constructing this. And what you can see from this survey is really pretty simple, because from 2019 to 2020 to November, December 2020, basically positive well-being just plummeted. That's what this means. All right. I feel more engaged in my work. All right. Look at what 2019, 2020, then boom. I have enough time to reflect. Boom. All of that. So this is what our residents, our frontline folks were thinking. And then think matters could get worse, because not only did you have a reduction in positive well-being, you had a significant increase in negative well-being. I feel worn out and weary after work, 76%. After work, I need more time than ever to relax, 76. 67%, I often feel emotionally drained. This was the state of our workforce. We started with the residents, but pretty much everybody was feeling this. Okay. So it was in this mode. Oh, and this was the other part. What was it that people actually mostly wanted, at least in terms of residents? These 4: after hours appointment with mental health providers, having a mechanism to block clinical time for professional appointments, online self-scheduling of appointments with mental health providers, and telehealth appointments with mental health providers. This is what the residents wanted in terms of the resources for their mental health concern. So at this point in time, this survey, this had been brought to leadership, and they asked me, Lorenzo, can you take a look at what we have in place in regards to systematic mental health and how we treat immediate distress for residents? I was like, oh, that'll be really easy, because I had done a bit of this work in 2017. This will be very simple because nothing actually has changed. We don't have anything. So there, that was a really easy answer. Dr. Frame and I like to keep things simple. That was easy, one of the easiest reports I ever gave. So Teambased, which blew my mind, she said, all right, we want you to serve as medical director and to start up. At that point in time, we were the GW Health and Wellness. All right, get that proposal up and running and started. And I said, well, you know what? Practicing what I preach in terms of realistic optimism. I was like, sure, absolutely. Sounds like a good idea. All right, so, whoa. And I believe I saw my colleague, John Pan, in the audience. And John will tell you, I certainly am, I can jump into things with, again, with John, a very naive, optimistic approach or whatnot. John was one of the first people I ever spoke to in regards to establishing or working in cancer survivorship here at GW. And he was just an instrumental colleague and just a really good guy. So I thank you, John. But Teambased set this up, and she had an idea and a vision that this is important. And you won't have a lot of leaders that actually go all in and say this, and Teambased did. So before we even talk about realistic optimism, I thought it was important that you actually have a sense of where this all came from. All right. And so now you do. Okay. So early 2020, optimism had an all-time low, probably more like mid to late 2020. Okay. So we're in here in the disillusionment phase, and that's where we start. Now, first off, I adapted this from the AMA, Creating a Resilient Organization. We have to first start with what are the four main sources, which I like this slide here. What are the four main sources of, if you will, occupational injury or stress injury for healthcare workers? Life threat, grief, moral injury, and fatigue injury, okay? All of these are vitally important in terms of understanding where people were at and what they were going through. When I first started working, it was actually just myself. It was actually just myself for a number of months until Dr. Frame came on board. Lee, when did you come on board? What was the exact date?
I believe it was about a year ago, actually. It was April of last year.
I want to say it was April of last year. Praise the Lord. All right. So before that, most of what I was doing was focused just on, if you will, triage and distress management and working with people that needed immediate care. And I was essentially a band of one. But in order to do that, we had to be able to get into conversations about what people were dealing with. And I can't emphasize enough, there's a great deal of moral injury. Yes, there was fatigue, there was grief, there was life. There's a great deal of moral injury. People felt as though I'm not able to do enough for my patients. I'm not able to be there in the way that I want. And what happened? It actually goes back to what one of our speakers just said. That ability to not only receive compassion, but give compassion started to evaporate. And it got into a dangerous cycle. So because you felt as though it was already said, because you felt as though you were burnt out, you still couldn't do it, or you shouldn't reach out, or you shouldn't for yourself, or you shouldn't actually express compassion. And that just actually made it worse. All right. But this was the state of GW. Okay. And I mean, it still is, but at least we have some tools in place. Now, when I started working with everybody, in terms of the first thing in regards to trying to cultivate realistic optimism is, one, not only do you have to actually acknowledge your stressors and the stress injuries, that was the importance of the other slide. Until you put that up, a lot of times healthcare professionals, they can talk in broad terms, but they won't actually say that this hurt me or this impacted me. So you have to acknowledge that these things are real and that they can absolutely affect you. The other thing is that you have to start to have an idea of what it means to deal with stress, what it means to be with stress, and kind of where you're at on the stress curve. This is one of the slides that, at times we will use in the Resiliency and Well-being Center in terms of that human function curve in regards to stress. So also the component of good stress and distress. Unfortunately, too many folks in the midst of 2020, as well as still now, but in general, they're in that panic and fatigue and ill state, too much distress. All right. One of the things I like to point out, especially to my students, is there's distress, but we don't want you to get bored out, and we don't want you to get burnt out. So you can also have too little, which is boredom. But really, we want you to be in that stretch zone. And occasionally you might have to strain, but once you get past that, that is an issue. So when you're working in your community or your clinic, or you're thinking about it, one of the things you want to start to do is to try to develop a language. And I find it very useful to keep that language simple. And stress, when I talk about stress, that is a term that is user-friendly. Everyone wants to talk about stress, all right? Not everyone wants to talk about suicide, even though more people want to talk about suicide than you think. But I find that stress, whole health, and well-being can be very powerful entry points to a conversation about what it is that you're going through with the vast majority of people. So this is a slide that I really like to utilize with folks. Okay, next, again, adapted from the AMA. This is very useful in terms of what? Starting to develop that shared language around what it is that you're going through. Okay, the crisis, the stressors, then the stress injury, then no intervention. What happens? Burnout, depression, substance use, increase in suicide, PTSD. But then what happens with the intervention? This little chart right here, very, 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 very powerful, in my humble opinion, in terms of framing the dialogue and the conversation that you can have with others in regards to starting the conversation about their self-care. I want to say that Dr. Rip and some of the other chief wellness officers across the country developed this. And Dr. Rip, a really great guy from Mount Sinai, who was so gracious in sitting down and talking with me, because there's been people that have been in this wellness space far, far, far longer than I have. And I certainly want to acknowledge everything that they've done, their support, and all the work that they've put out there. Next. Now, we are into the Resiliency and Well-being Center proper, okay? As we're going through this, as we're looking at the intervention, as we're looking at what our colleagues and health professionals are going through, this is when Lee came on board, and we were sitting there, we're like, okay, we have to get very clear about what it is that we're trying to do. What is it? What's our mission? How do we go about it? And this is where you have it, all right? So the GW Resiliency and Wellbeing Center supports individual, departmental, and institutional level purpose, which is the foundation of whole person health, to support the meaningful contributions of all employees and trainees at GW. All right, so we treat at different levels. At the individual, with, if you will, educational talks, groups, as well as one-on-one coaching, organizational workshops, consultations, as well as institutional. All right, where we serve as a clearinghouse for resources, funding, and support. All right, I was very, 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 particularly after meeting Lee, just adamant that the foundational basis of the Resiliency and Wellbeing Center had to be in whole person health. That had to be the foundation of it in how we grew, all right? Not just one particular practice or anything of that nature, but that had to be the foundation of it. That had to be the foundation of Resiliency and Wellbeing Center. We certainly weren't going to build it overnight, but people had to know that's where we were starting from. That was going to be our scientific, our philosophical, this was going to be our underpinning, all right? So that, I think, whenever you're trying to start something or change a culture or build realistic optimism, you don't have to use whole person health, but I actually think that you should, because of just that idea of purpose. That's my opinion, all right? But I do believe that as you're doing this across your community, your clinic, or your health enterprise, you have to make sure that your model makes sense. And I like a model with teeth. I like a model that can get dirty as well as clean. So I think whole person health does that. Now, so this is a current organization, and actually it's expanded quite a little bit, but this is an example of our current organization here. So we have a core staff. It's made up of myself, Dr. Frame, our super duper, the next person to come along, our administrative director, Janet Rodriguez, just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. The only person who can do multimedia and talk about Star Wars with me and everything. Yeah, you're not going to meet anybody like that. I mean, who does that? Nobody. No, people don't do that. No. So anyway, so that was great. And then we added our the next person to come along is our superb behavioral health director, Ms. Victoria Karakcheva, who has done a phenomenal job in regards to really adding the, if you will, the rigor that comes with like stuff that you would need to like certify a center. She's a therapist. She can manage crisis. She can build programs. She can do all of that. And Victoria, I want to also acknowledge, I've always just been so humble about how gracious you are with your time and just who you are, considering that, you know, you and your family are from the Ukraine and you've been doing all of this, working nonstop in the midst of all of this. So absolutely. And then certainly, last and most certainly not least, and I'd say to complete our core team is our superb physician assistant, Miss Ashley Drapeau. And she actually has brought a great deal of energy as well as a needed clinical aspect as well. One of the things when Lee and I were interviewing, it's like, oh yeah, she's what all of this like movement-based work, all of this. What? Oh, no. She's with us. Yeah, we're recruiting her right now. So that is, again, hopefully the Resiliency and Wellbeing Center, our team will show you, illustrate what we believe in. All right, that yes, purpose and resilience is a team-based effort. Okay, so that's the core staff. All right, and we have an advisory board as well as many folks that we collaborate with, and I'll get to that in a moment. So these are our areas of focus. I'm simplifying this. Prevention and maintenance is based off of, again, whole person care and treatment and support, stress management. I could also say mental health, all right, in terms of therapy, things of that nature, but we do a lot of different things. And these are the services and programs that we offer, okay? I mentioned from our educations, our lectures, our workshops, our resource navigation, but then I also, if you will, a couple of programs, the Caring for the Caregiver programs, which is our peer support program, all right, in which we train peers in terms of Griff hesitates to call it a psychotherapy, but I would say it's a psychotherapy developed by Dr. James Griffith called Hope Modules that we utilize different aspects of it. It's small, it's portable, and it generates hope and movement. We also have implemented Talkspace, which is an asynchronous-based text message therapy platform, but you also have live video messaging. And we also have a clinician well-being program for residents, well, basically for anybody really at this point in time, but certainly at that point in time at the initial implementation for residents as well as attendings, all right, as well as an employee assistance program. So these were our areas of focus. So again, need, all right, or disaster, crisis, establish what the needs are, what were new and what were old. Think about what the mission should be. Team built around that, all right? Now you're starting to get into a position to where you can begin the work of cultivating realistic optimism. So we borrowed this from colleagues, I want to say Locke at University of Oregon, and this isn't our slide, okay? But it illustrates what I think many, if you will, wellness programs, the collaboration that they have with different entities. So I want to give Dr. Locke a lot of credit for being so gracious and sharing that information with us. But you need to know that part, again, resilience is a team-based effort, and we have a number of partners that the Resiliency and Wellbeing Center works with in order to accomplish this. Okay, now, our center, even though I have it at the top, in certain ways, we had to start from a place of how do we work with people in high levels of distress, okay? How do we work with those that are experiencing significant mental health distress secondary to everything and the challenges of the pandemic and the crisis, all right? Then we built everything else. But again, if you're gonna meet that quadruple aim, if you will, of healthcare, and if you're gonna be able to get the foundation of cultivating realistic optimism, you're going to have a number of these things in place so that people are going to start to have the space to start to think about it. Now, again, this is just how we go about, let me just move my thing here, how you can request a consult. Very simple. We have it on our website. Okay. And then this is just our consultation process, all right, which many services at this point in time have used, whether it is surgery clinics, whether it's the Department of Internal Medicine, OB-GYN, emergency medicine, dermatology, law school, at this point in time, the government, Fannie Mae. I'm leaving a lot of places out, but a lot of people, we now have done so many of these workshops and lectures, as well as interventions. But this is our consultation process and how you go about it. And again, this is kind of just selling a bit of what it is we're trying to do. Okay, prevention and self-care so that we can just deal with the challenge and crisis and modulate the stress. Resiliency and well-being skills so that you can deal with the stress as well as the injury, as well as if you will, a formal mental health syndrome can result. And if someone does get injured or if they have a formal health syndrome, we have support and treatment, ideally with the idea of preventing impairment. Now, this is just my gestalt in terms of concerns. 2020 to 2021, I thought there was a lot of anxiety, stress of social isolation, stress of increased family interactions, actually, work environments, and various forms of occupational injury. That was 2020, 2021. So where exactly are we now in 2022? I believe from the conversations that I have with others, all right, from the consults that we get, both formal and informal, all right, that these are starting to become the questions. Approaches to team dynamics, trust, transparency, new workflows. My colleague is in distress, and how can I help? Referrals for child and adolescent psychiatry or mental health. If they would allow us to set up our own child and adolescent mental health on-site services, I don't think we'd have a human resource problem whatsoever. Okay, appreciating and understanding different perspectives on mask mandates. This is actually quite a testy thing, particularly around graduation and hooding ceremonies. And this is the big one, career and life questions. Where do I go from here? What just happened? This is gonna happen again. Am I the same person after this? What does that all mean? These are the questions that we're getting at in 2022. So, again, I feel we are now maybe here, maybe, I don't know. I think that, there could be a variant at another variant at any moment, but at this point in time, this is part of the realistic optimistic approach. I'm expecting variants. I believe that we're kind of at the point of we're going to have a little bit of reconstruction now, just now. And that reconstruction is going to have big roller coaster dips, much more than they're in this slide. But this is where we're at. I believe that we are still processing everything that occurred. I don't believe I know that. But I believe that we're at this point right now, okay? So reconstruction, but it's opportunity for growth framed by realistic approach. That's the key thing, opportunity, which involves choice. So opportunity for growth framed by a realistic approach. One of the reasons why I've been going all in about realistic optimism, because I've looked at similar to others, like, resilience and what are the big 10, what are factors involved with resilience. Now, this was actually, I took this from Charney in his book, Charney at Mount Sinai. And it's, I'll give you all the title, I'm blanking on the title, but it came from Charney's book in terms of like, if you will, mastering their life's biggest challenges or resilience. And what they did, they did research, all right, on resilience. They interviewed people. They looked at the evidence base. And then one of my favorite things is they came up with the top 10, if you will, resilience or coping factors, all right? And me being a simple guy, I really like this. So I'm like, all right, give me a list any day of the week. And I'm very, very happy, all right? So I love all of this, but I did love the maintained and optimistic but realistic outlook. And that's kind of, again, what I'm going to focus on a bit more as we move forward. I felt as though this was the thing that got, in particular, sapped from all of us, not just health professionals, all right? It got sucked out. And part of that was due to COVID fragments. Sometimes that resilience or that realistic optimistic approach is best done when you get the synergy off of each other, when you play off of each other. A lot of that realistic, optimistic approach can be not someone giving you a pep talk. It can be a shared joke. It can be just a smile. Like, for instance, if I say something right now, you all won't get it. But if I say Mac product and cheese grits, like, my team will understand what I am talking about. It's like a Seinfeld episode. Like, there's a language, you know, but a lot of that, like, realistic optimism comes from just your shared interaction with your colleagues and you being able to say, wait a minute, hold it. There's going to be a way out of this. Things have changed, but certain things haven't changed. So that is why the focus on realistic optimism. And also, from what I've seen, people actually, that resonates with people in regards to, you know what, I want to be optimistic, but I want to be realistic. All of this gets at what? Growth. All right, that's the thing. When I think of resilience, our colleagues already gave us a definition of it. For me, resilience isn't just getting hit. It's not just getting hit and beat up and building your armor back. That's not sometimes that's necessary, but that's not a very pleasant thing. All right, it's growth. It's growth. When everything happens, when things get burnt down, how do I come back, but how do I grow and learn and be better, if you will, quote unquote? That's a bit of a loaded word, but I would say the term I use, I don't use better, I use, because people say, sometimes people say, you go through something and you get stronger. I think stronger can be a loaded term. I prefer you go through something and you discover something different about yourself in addition to the other things, all right? So when I think of resilience, I think of growth. I think of how do we grow through this, okay? And realistic optimism is a tool for it. So this is taken from Schanfeld and folks at Mayo, which I encourage everybody to read their book. It's really great, and it gives the blueprint in regards to esprit de corps and how you can build a resilient organization. I put this here because the driving dimensions of burnout, and I'm not going to give you all another burnout lecture, of burnout are the same drivers that drive engagement, okay? But notice what's at the middle: meaning in work, purpose. What's at the middle of whole person care? Meaning in purpose. That to me seems like a match made in heaven. So if we can use realistic optimism to help you see, slow down, and redefine or reconnect with your purpose, then my thought process is that all these other things are going to circle around it naturally and start to make sense, particularly if you have invested leaders, okay? But make no mistake that the driver dimensions of burnout are the same ones that drive engagement. And here's one of my favorite snippets from the book, which I repeat a lot. For burnout, when you look at the studies, if you have someone spend 20% of their time doing what they find they love, which I think is a very strong statement, I prefer find purpose in or meaning, 20% of their time in work week, you have a 50% maximum reduction in burnout. Here's the interesting thing. If you go over that 20%, the reduction doesn't increase linearly. In other words, it becomes diminishing returns. So that gives us what? Something to plan for. That gives us something to do. That gives us something, whether it's you, your leaders, or anyone. Let me at least start with the idea. I'm going to make sure you spend one day out of the week doing what you love, that you find purpose in. Yeah, I tell people, as a leader, I hold myself accountable to that. I tell people that I got to make sure 20% of the time you're doing what you love. And if I can't do that, then I suck. That's it. Now I can't promise you anything more than that, but I can work on that. All right. So, and I believe that's a key thing or metric, because that's also, if you will, a direct illustration of realistic optimism. You can't do what you love 100% of the time. Heck, you can't do it 50% of the time. Well, maybe you can, depending on what you do. But you certainly, and I'm not talking about, and I know I'm probably in this audience, there are a lot of people that are constantly doing what they love, and I do too. But I'd be lying to you if I told you I enjoy writing budgets and doing Excel reports. I actually don't. But I see the point to it. So, but you can make sure that people have 20% of their time dedicated to what it is that they love, so that they can reconnect and rediscover purpose and find it. Okay. So now, when we talk about realistic optimism, if we talk about realistic optimism, we got to talk about two things. We got to talk about pessimism, and then we got to talk about blind optimism. Now, I don't know about the people in this audience. I'll take a pessimist over a blind optimist any day of the week. Sorry, gotta let y'all know that. I'll take a pessimist over a blind optimist any day of the week. A little bit about me. I'm from Northeast Cleveland, Ohio, raised by a single Black mother. So there was no time really to be cute. So I'd rather be a bit more on the pessimistic side than on the blindly optimistic side. You know, as a matter of fact, if you look at people that have survived very difficult things in life, it's usually the ones that tend to be on the pessimistic side. So I personally think blind optimism has zero place truly in a crisis. Notice I said blind optimism. I didn't say hope, I said blind optimism. Okay. Now, so what we're looking for is realistic optimism. Optimism with teeth, optimism that can get dirty, optimism that can go out in the rain, in the sun for that matter, in the desert, all right? Optimism that is grounded in purpose and goals, but actually acknowledges the realities of the situation. This is what we're looking for. That's the sweet spot. So what's the difference between realistic versus blind optimism? Okay. You notice the negative, but you don't stay engaged in it. Here, we'll do a little imagery. I mean, have any of you, a certain opportunity of the pandemic was, at least for me, for a lot of people, no traffic. Dude, I got into the hospital like there was nobody's business. I was like, ooh. And better than that, a lot of times I didn't have to get into the hospital, all right? I mean, I'm actually at home right now looking into my beautiful backyard and my dogs flip and whisper there. You can't see them, but I can. So that's great. So, but when I did have to take the traffic, go in, have you ever been stuck in traffic and you're just sitting there and you're just getting upset. You're just getting mad. You're just getting more angry or frustrated, or people are cutting you off or this, that, or the other. You have a couple of choices, okay? You can either choose to stay engaged in that traffic, or you can figure out or be mindful or reflect or think about, all right, this is what it is. Is there a better use I can mentally make use of my time? Maybe there's a podcast I can listen to. Maybe I can just take a couple of moments because the car's not moving, just to breathe. Maybe I can actually take a look to my right. Imagine I'm actually driving and look at the Potomac. Oh, wow. Look at the Kennedy Center. Oh, well, I've been looking at it for 20 minutes, but that's cool. That's all right. I can be mindful of my environment. But what I'm doing is I'm not staying engaged in the negative, because the negative, if you stay engaged in the negative, one of our speakers said something that I loved. I loved it. When you stay engaged in the negative, in my humble opinion, that has a tendency to activate the fight or flight response, which has a tendency to activate excessive emotions, inflammation, and to drain energy. Okay, that kind of to me gets at the science behind it. But realistic optimism is you make a choice, you do not stay engaged in the negative. Blind optimism, I mean, that's not even in engagement, that's like self-deception. You're not actually willing to acknowledge reality, all right? Okay, so if you're blindly optimistic, you're going to underestimate the risk. Okay. If you're overly pessimistic, you could, as an example, stay too engaged in the negative. All right. And miss out on opportunities or what is going on. Either blind optimism, in my opinion, you won't necessarily bring the right energy to bear for the right situation. And pessimism can create such an energy drain on people, in my opinion. And people put in that fight or flight response that you do not even have the energy capable to really experience or deal with life when opportunities arise. So pessimism or blind optimism are problems. Realistic optimism is a key, but remember, realistic optimism involves you not staying engaged in the negative. If you're going to try to work with realistic optimism in your community, your clinic, or your enterprise, you have to have at least let people know there's some form of an infrastructure built up so that you can meet some of those base Maslow hierarchy of needs, safety, security, and things of that nature. All right, so again, this is, people have talked about that. This is, to my right, is the negative emotion cycle. You've got the negative expectations, the feelings of weakness. You can have self-pity or denial or resentment, and that thing just spirals. I call that like negative death spiral almost. It just keeps going and going and going and going and going. All right. So general strategies that you can use for optimism in terms of if you want to start to break an optimistic approach down a little bit more to deal with this are a lot of things. There's positive reappraisal. There's goal-directed problem-focused coping, one of my favorites. It's particularly on attainable goals. But this is the one I want to pause on. And I thought the speakers today did a superb job of this. Infusion of meaning into ordinary events. So let me, as a story, I was in the Resiliency and Well-being Center. I've been honored and privileged to work with many health professionals. And a lot of times people will come to me and they'll just say, you know, Lorenzo, look, we were short-staffed for the past month. I got a poor performance. This whole like optimism or everything that you're talking about, it's a load of you know what. Can you, like, seriously, I need a med and I need the med now. Okay, can you do that for me? I'm like, whoa, wait, I'm pro meds, but I'm also pro nutrition, pro sleep, pro movement. But let's take a moment. Okay, I get it. Right now, you can't find meaning in work. Let's look at what you can find meaning in. And let's start there. They're like, huh? Like, yeah, what can you find meaning in? And it's gotta be small. It's gotta be small. They're like, huh, really? I'm like, yeah, let me start. People will be shocked about this. Like, what do I find meaning in? Oddly enough, it's a really simple thing. I find meaning sometimes in ironing my clothes. I find meaning in making up my bed. They're like, huh, what? That's a big deal. When I was growing up, I'm very, what was the magic word? Appreciative, gratitude. I didn't have the ability to do all of these things. I didn't have all of this. So I find meaning in that. I find meaning. Then once I start small in those ordinary events, I'm like, I can progress to family. I can progress to food. I can progress to sleep. But once I start small, once I start finding meaning in those events, I can reactivate or rekindle my meaning and purpose in my chosen occupation or calling. Okay, but finding meaning, infusion of meaning into ordinary events. As a matter of fact, it's been in my impression that if you get really good at it, everything becomes so meaningful that everything just naturally flows. You're just so grateful for everything. You can enter into, if you will, the ever elusive for some flow state. All right, so now let us continue. All right, so some things or some tools I think are very useful for cultivating the spirit of realistic optimism. One of those is I talked about in terms of the need to let go of the negative. When you think about it, I love radical acceptance because I love dialectical behavioral therapy. Marshall Linehan, all of it. And obviously DBT has acknowledges quite a bit in terms of Zen, meditation, mindfulness. But one of the things where I was first introduced to the concept of radical acceptance was dialectical behavioral therapy. And usually when I work with folks, I just give them this like radical acceptance in 5 essential steps. Obviously, they're depending on what you look at, there's 10. And depending on how you work with folks, you can spend anywhere from a month to 3 months on nothing but this in mindfulness skills if you're doing true DBT therapy. However, I find that many people just benefit from the idea, I need to accept what a thing is without judging it. I just need to accept it without judging. If you can do that, you can disengage from the negative, and then you can allow realistic optimism to flourish, to begin. So radical acceptance is one thing. I also find that when people radically accept a thing, which takes a moment, you lower your distress and you can enter into a place of eustress. You radically accept, you observe, you remind, you acknowledge, you practice, list what it is that you're seeing. Again, no judgment. You're going to naturally find that you're going to move from that place of distress back to eustress if you do it enough. If you do it enough. So radical acceptance as a key skill that we can teach individuals. Next, remember, if you go back to the slide, if you have a good memory, remember Resiliency and Well-being Center, 3 levels: individual, department and group, and system. Now we're getting into groups. Probably the biggest concept that we get is trust. It's, do people trust each other? And obviously, for many reasons, COVID just exposed any kind of trust issues or accountability that we had to each other. It just put it out there. So one of the things that we talk about when we work with teams is in regards to how do we start to actually think about trust and establish this? What are the elements that go into trust? All right, and you look here, these are the interlocking gears of trust: the perceived trustworthiness, cooperative behavior, and shared knowledge, but particularly the perceived trustworthiness. So we work with teams, and we get, I just got done doing a consult today. We're going to actually have to do a workshop on, in terms of how do we get team trust back? Okay, this is a slide that I typically share with folks in terms of, as you start to look at those factors that help with trust, you also have to look at the things that losing trust in team dynamic, insult to the person or group, shirking responsibility, public criticism, rule violations. Probably the biggest one is the insult to the person or the group. All right. I find you are more likely to engage in these activities if you have stayed engaged with the negative. You are more likely to stay engaged with a negative if you are judging, if you're not radically accepting the situation. And instead of radically accepting the situation or describing the facts of it or just accepting it, you are what? You are blaming, you are criticizing, you are comparing, you are contending, the so-called, if you will, emotional cancers. I don't know where Steve Covey got it from, but that's where I first heard it, okay? But again, these things, when you stay engaged in the negative, this can cause you to be more likely to engage in these behaviors, which cripple trust in teams, okay? Now, what I am telling you, if you're following also, whatever you do for the team or individually, you should also be able to do it in your personal life. So everything that I'm telling you should apply to your family. The same things in regards to team, in trust at work, there are principles. I mean, you don't want to do an Excel report with your family, but these elements of trust also apply to your family group, okay? So again, now we're at a group or a team level. And then the next thing we teach is active listening. All right. You can spend all day long listening. You can spend, people always talk to me about, in psychiatry, they're like, it's the talking. I'm like, no, dude, it's the listening. It has, the talking is great, but no, it's about the listening. It's the hearing, it's the telling of these stories. It's the listening. And of all these things, I love every single one of them, including summarizing. Okay, including summarizing is probably my favorite thing, but probably the biggest thing, which lifts people's spirits, can make you feel good, but also helps establish bonds and connection, is acknowledging. People want to be seen, they want to be heard. And a lot of times it's a very simple thing to do. Listen to what our speakers talk about. How long did it take to establish an empathic connection? I believe the quote was 30 seconds. That's like, so that means can you imagine how impactful 3 minutes can be if it's really thought through? Think about your favorite song. For whatever reason, Adele always comes to mind when I think about this, but I could pick other people. But for whatever reason, she's always my go-to. I still remember when I first heard her say, hello, or what? I'm like, whoa. That to me is an example of the power of music. But my point is you can have an impactful connection with people just simply by acknowledging them. And it doesn't have to be a big, grand thing. Just acknowledge and let them know that they are there. That is huge. Or acknowledge that you are hearing them. So when we teach people active listening, we can teach them all of these things, but I ask them to really think about acknowledging. And then the other thing is, I don't need everybody to do all 4 of these things. It's great if you can, but there's one of these that you naturally do. There's one of these that you authentically do, that you could do in a crisis. That you can do when you're having fun, but you naturally do it. I want to find what that is, and then I just want you to do more of it and learn something else. And then I'll tell you what the name for it is. You'll be like, oh, there's a technique for that. I'm like, yeah, but you just naturally do it. That's just you. That's just you. That's part of your, if you will, using a little bit of stuff from Gardner, that's part of your talent. That could be one of your talents. But find out what you naturally do, then do it. Don't try to necessarily do all of this. So now, we've established trust, we've listened, we've radically accepted. Okay, if you want a longer version of this, Blind Optimism, this is a blog I wrote. It only works in fantasy football, all right, because I lost my residence in fantasy football. But in any event, you can read that, and that tells a little bit more. There it is, Resilience, the Science of Mastering Life's Great Challenges, Southwick and Charney. But that was just something I wrote about it that a lot of people actually, I put it here just because I actually thought it was kind of okay. I'm not a great writer, and I thought it was I'm not a great writer, and that certainly was not one of my great pieces, but it resonated with people. So If you want to check it out, you can. But people that I've been talking to, this approach about realistic optimism is helpful. And now, individual, we gave you the techniques. We gave you one, radical acceptance. You can combine that with anything that the speakers already said, mindful movement, belly breathing, anything of that nature. We gave you what I believe 2 key components in regards to if you're acting at a group level: trust and listen. But I got a little bit specific with you in regards to, I just didn't tell you to do it. I kind of tried to break it down a little bit more nuanced in terms of how you do it. If you wanted to actually speak with us more, we get a lot more technical as you need us to be. But for the purpose of this, I wanted to give you that. And then all of that, now we're at the system level. All right. Realistic optimism and creating a culture. This is the whole person wheel. Dr. Frame showed me this and I love it. I just love it. I look at it and it just speaks to me because it has purpose in the middle of it. Now, there's different ways to go about this. I think that if you have purpose and you really adhere to it, you're going to start to naturally, with a bit of encouragement, reinforcement, that team, you're going to start to do a lot of those things that are self-care. You're going to start to do that. Okay. I would also argue, okay, you can't find your purpose right now. That's hard. That's very difficult. I personally think you have to double down on your purpose every 5 years. That's just me. You can agree or disagree. I think you have to double down on your purpose every 5 years because you revisit all the same developmental tasks. So you gotta go back to it and you gotta figure it out. Again, nothing in life is easy. So even if you can't find your purpose, if you have established self-care practices, you're going to create that what? You can almost think of it as a protective circle that's going to let the purpose come up. So either way you start it, I'm fine, just so long as you do it. Okay. And again, it took us a while before we could start to introduce this concept. Actually, I probably say we really started to get more robust with it, probably maybe around November, December. Okay, so that was once we started to get the team, and now it is really kind of like we want to start leading with this. And now this is starting to become a language that we use in workshops with students, with residents, with teams, as well as getting them to commit to more than one session. All right, so purpose. And when you do this, when you start to build this, then you have to start to build the resources. So this is our website. Thank you so very much, Janet. This is just an example, like, we have multimedia, we got services, we got support groups, we got resources, we got events, we have a number of things. And our website is part of our platform. And it hopefully illustrates what we talk about in terms of the different things that one can utilize. We have our resource page. All right. And if you look to the right there, you got COVID-19, anxiety, burnout, EAP, self-care, stress management, and yes, suicide prevention. Absolutely. Yeah. And didn't forget about that. That was right there. And we have one of our signature initiatives, and I want to thank Dr. Rosemary Bowes for her generous gift in terms of women's well-being. And I'm so humbled and proud of the work that Dr. Lisa Catapano, Dr. Frame, as well as Ms. Carrick-Chava have done to bring this all together in the lectures and what it is doing in regards to advancing this topic. And I think for me, this is in terms of our first phase of development in the Resiliency Well-being Center, it is definitely one of our signature efforts. And then finally, I'm gonna leave you with this. We started out with the idea of the pandemic and what it had caused and what it brought us through. Teambased actually had already led us off, and she said that, the pandemic, really, we can start to look at that as a lens of opportunity. We can look at this as a lens for opportunity. And out of the pandemic came, if you will, opportunity for us to grow the Resiliency and Well-being Center. Many of our speakers, and I'm going to go back to Dr. Adon, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing anybody's name here. Dr. Adon gave us a beautiful idea of what it means, what resilience is, a definition of it, and the core ideas in that language. And I apologize if I'm missing anybody, but I did also want to go to Dr. Gordon and what he said in regards to trauma, all right, and understanding what we did go through, that it did have an impact, and it is all right for us to do things in variety, in evidence-based things to do it. So with all of that, that was the framework. And then we talk about, all right, this is what we need to do. These are the forms of occupational injury. All right. These are the supports that we set up first for us. This is my take. Before we start to talk about that realistic, optimistic approach, once we talk about that realistic, optimistic approach, we want to not engage in a negative. We want to use evidence-based, if you will, techniques that are going to help us on an individual, departmental level, as well as on a system level. And then finally, growth is always a realistic option. It involves choice, but it's always a realistic option. All right. Thanks, y'all. Went a bit longer than I thought, but there you have it.